and I will just take away from the. I don't like to make very long presentations because I think it's very interesting that we can see each other in this view. And once we start the presentation, then the whole slide takes the time. So I'm just going to do it for a couple of minutes so that I can show the participants, especially people who may not have participated in previous meetings, what the purpose of this space is and what we have done so far. So please allow me a couple of seconds. Can you confirm that you are seeing PowerPoint slide?
Yes.
Yes. So okay, starting to do this. So with this, we are finally or officially starting the second webinar of the Community of Practice of Measurement and Quantification of South-South Cooperation, which is going to be focusing around established approaches to measurement of South-South cooperation. And this, we are also going to understand why we are labeling these established approaches. This is the Knowledge Hub of South-South cooperation of APC Colombia, which is a space for promoting active discussion or open discussions about topics related to South-South cooperation, how it is measured, how it is handled, for example, and other ideas around it, with the purpose of maybe taking advantage of the work that many people and many organizations around the world have already done, and pushing the knowledge frontier along with interested parties. The logos that you see in the lower part of the slide are partners that we have are already convinced to participate, have agreed to participate here. So we have the very happy support
Hola,
of
buenos
the
días.
Partnership for
¿Cómo estás?
Effective Triangular Cooperation, the GPSDD, the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, the Programa Iberoamericano para el Fortalecimiento de la Cooperación Sur-Sur. That's hard to say in Spanish. It's even harder to translate to English, so I'm just leaving it that. And Southern Voice, a network of think tanks around the Global South. The agenda, my name again is Luis Roa. I'm part of the team at IPC Colombia, and the agenda for this meeting is to do a short recapitulation of the work that we have done. Afterwards, a keynote presentation, a presentation by panelists around these ideas of established approaches for measuring South-South cooperation, and afterwards, a discussion and Q&A session around questions that you may have for the panelists and the keynote presenter, and in answering the question that we sent to you with the call for the meeting. So very quickly, the context of this community of practice on measuring and quantification of South-South cooperation. We are using this as a methodology to gather knowledge professionals, which is you, to discuss how South-South cooperation is quantified, measured, or assessed in 2022. And why 2022? Because it's precisely the halfway point of the 2030 agenda. And around these ideas, there are several kind of tracks or initiatives around the world that are pushing the world of South-South cooperation maybe to a convergence or at least to a dialogue of data between South-South cooperation and official development assistance. And this is reigniting some debates that already happened maybe about 8 or 9 years ago about around the creation of civics, for example, but I'm sure our colleague Cristina is going to speak something about this. So how we are maybe the purpose of this space is to produce a benchmark document that will be the outcome of this. And this document will summarize the past, present, and potential future of measurement and quantification methodologies for South-South cooperation. And we are doing this because around this idea of the rising South, this comes also with rising expectations for development countries around how they do their work and the kinds of decisions and the efficiency of the work that we do, for example, in Colombia, and I'm sure in other countries. So we think this space or this work allows us to showcase what is being done, to improve on actions, to do more better, and to promote narratives about how South-South cooperation advances the 2030 agenda. We started this work in December of last year with an opening event that was both the opening event for the community of practice and an action dialogue for effective cooperation, sponsored by the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation. And in that event, we had participation from Catalina Quintero from APC Colombia, who spoke about management and risky bets. John Hardy from a Chamber of Commerce of the Palmira municipality here in Colombia, who spoke about key performance indicators for nurturing entrepreneurship in Colombia. Paulo Esteves, an international researcher, who spoke about those the eligibility criteria and the South-South cooperation, maybe global public goods and how it is measured. Around both of these topics, things have moved over the last couple of months, so I'm sure we are going to revisit some of these in future webinars. And Emmanuel Letousse from Data Pop Alliance spoke about definitions, objectives, and approaches to conducting South-South cooperation through the exploration of meaning. So he spoke about what is the meaning of South-South cooperation, what do we mean to achieve by South-South cooperation, and what are the means to conduct activities, for example. So that was a very interesting idea that we are going to weave around the document and the way that we handle these spaces. We also did how do you say this, like a cooperation dynamic between the participants to identify an initial reading list of the key documents that would help us understand the status quo of the issue of measuring and quantifying South-South cooperation. We conducted or built this list thanks to the support and the ideas of the participants at the event. After we have spent the last couple of months reviewing this documentation, understanding how it means and what it actually says, and after that analysis, we started identifying trends, which I'm sure that all of us can understand how important that's an ability. And we understood maybe that this trend and this list indicated at least 3 different moments or 3 different ways of organizing this information. So a lot of bibliography, a lot of documents spoke about the established approaches, both in Iberoamerica with the PIF, for example, but also in Africa and Asia with, for example, Development Compact and other ideas. We understood that a couple of or several of those documents spoke about current challenges regarding, for example, this idea of data convergence and divergence between ODA and South-South cooperation. And this is going to be the topic of the following webinar. And also other documents did a review of more experimental approaches or more local approaches that go deeper into measuring in different countries. And that would be material for a third webinar and a third conversation. So this cycle of webinars for this month and the coming 2 months are going to focus on this idea. The established approaches, which is this one for measuring and quantifying South-South cooperation. The next one in a month, so the last week of June, is going to be about convergence and current challenges in 2022. And the third one in the third week of July is going to be about experimental approaches. Without further ado, as we were doing this literature review, as if by some very happy coincidence, Dr. Laura Weisbich from Brazil produced a paper around precisely the geopolitical context that are around this topic of measuring South-South cooperation, how different countries move between this spectrum. And we invited her and she agreed to participate here as a keynote speaker. So Dr. Weisbich, I'm going to stop my presentation right now and thank you again for agreeing to participate here and give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Luis. It's really, really a pleasure to be here. First of all, I really want to thank you and APC Colombia for leading on the series of debates. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Okay, for leading on the series of debates and actually hosting us here. For a while now, I have been working as both a practitioner and a researcher on measurement related issues in the context of South-South cooperation, and I'm pretty sure that some people know me already from those spaces. Actually, colleagues from APC Colombia have kindly invited me to open today's session, and it's actually an honor with some rather, let me put it this way, provocative remarks on the politics of measurement. I know that other colleagues after me will be discussing and showing us their own experiences and the approaches and the tools they have developed and the challenge that I have faced. But I want to take the space, the couple of minutes I have, just to put us in the context to better understand the context we are all navigating, right? The political context that we are all navigating. And this really comes, as Luis was saying, this really comes from a reflection that I recently published in Global Policy. It's a paper that it's open access, so you can all read afterwards if you want, on the politics of measurement in South-South cooperation. So the paper looks at, let's put it a decade, right? It's a little bit over a decade, but let's put it that it's a decade of debates on South-South cooperation effectiveness, and more specifically on the issue of measurement and quantification. So in other words, we're looking at the road from Nairobi, 2009, to BAPA plus 40, 2019, plus, the couple of years that actually bring us here today. And what we look, when we look at this period, what we see, it's really the rise of South-South effectiveness as an issue, right, in the agenda. In other words, we're really moving from a discussion on who is doing what and where, so describing flows and initiatives and getting a sense of, mapping the landscape, to trying to understand whether and how those initiatives are working, and working for whom, right? And benefiting whom in many ways. So for all the ways the discussions around effectiveness could have and might kind of evolve in the future, there is a growing appetite to discuss and operationalize measurement, right? Measuring. So here's the first point. Effectiveness, it's not only about measurement and it's not only about quantification, but there is an appetite for discussions to move both at the technical level and political level to understand and really operationalize what measurement is in South-South cooperation. So when we talk about measurement, we're talking about flows, but we're also talking about results and impacts, and the ways in which different countries and different practitioners are seeing those, concepts, and they understand what result is, what impact is. So for those working as practitioners in the field, basically us here, it's not really surprising that we move from effectiveness to measurement, as we know and we understand how measurement is important throughout the field, right? It has been important in the development cooperation field as a whole for traditional ODA, and it's very important in the context of the SDGs agenda. So then what is unique about South-South cooperation? The first thing is that the measurement agenda in the context of South-South cooperation has really grown from what I call pressures from outside and pressures from within. So pressures from outside, namely from traditional donors and from the institutions they have created or lead. And pressures from within, in this sense, it's the range of domestic constituencies in each of those southern countries or countries with similar levels of development, as we're calling here, be that parliaments, governmental agencies, the media, civil society groups. So pressures from outside and pressures from within to move forward in the agenda of understanding what governments are doing and trying to measure it from different perspectives. So while it's clear and that each country faces its own unique set of pressures, this is present in virtually all countries that have been active in the field. So here I'm not trying to homogenize different countries. We fully acknowledge that different countries have different sorts of pressures, but they all face different, as they move, as Luis was saying, as they move into the rising agenda, then all of them are facing here and there different kind of internal/external pressure to measure, to quantify. At the same time, the response each country is actually giving to this growing external and internal demand for measuring, it has varied. So difference among countries respond, and here I'm pretty sure you all know, to political, diplomatic, as well as technical imperatives, right? All of those things are playing out at the same time for each country. So where we are now in 2022, on the one hand, there is a broad agreement among southern governments and practitioners on not fully, let's put it like this, emulating OECD DAC frameworks, metrics, and tools. So what I call in the paper, something along the lines of a differentiated integration. In other words, joining a community of development actors or development providers or development partners, while upholding a Southern identity, upholding something that speaks to the nature of the development cooperation these countries are entertaining among themselves. The second thing that we also see is experimentation at the national and international level. As we all know, and we'll hear more about, different people doing different things in the coming sessions. It's important to point out that while there has been experimentation in all regions, Latin America is where most of the operationalization has been done, both at the regional level and at a country level, different countries' experiences. Showing, I might put it like this, a political will by governments and or practitioners inside those countries to design context-relevant solutions. It is a political will, right? To move from discussing to trying out with all the challenges that we know. On the other hand, and I'm about to finalize because I don't want to take much of your time here. On the other hand, as we see, experimentation, we also see what I call in the paper measurement battles. Those battles, right? This fight, the struggle, is taking place both at the global, regional, and national levels. Why? Because measurement is contentious, and it will remain so. It is a technical and political exercise. Although we like to call it a technical exercise, and I appreciate that, it is technical and political at the same time. And then while we all know that there is no, let's put it here, single framework or single metrics to count and account for South-South cooperation so far, and maybe there is little appetite for creating one at this particular point, that have been throughout these years, throughout the decades, and above all in the last years, several attempts to generate Southern-led and South-South cooperation relevant agreed frameworks at different fora. This might have been, the initial attempts by the core group of Southern partners at the UN, or the GPDC, or TOSD working group, or many others, right? CGB and others. So this kind of consensus building exercise, as we know, again, it's nothing but a political exercise. Although we're talking about measurement, and measurement has a technical component, it is a political exercise. So political diplomatic agreement might take longer, but experimentation on the ground is already happening. And in many ways, it's leading the way, showing that measurement is possible and beneficial to strengthening this modality as such, right? And boosting its legitimacy both at home and at the global level. So I'll leave you here. We can actually hear from those who have been experimenting on the ground, being really at the forefront of these efforts. And I thank you again, APC Colombia, once more for kindly inviting me and for hosting this space.
Thank you, Dr. Weiswich, for those ideas and also for your disposition of participating here. Just to quick bring to mind maybe 3 points of the structure of what you just said, which goes hand in hand with the structure of the paper also. So you spoke a lot about this idea of measurement growing, the agenda for measurement growing within the Global South, both from outside pressures and from inside pressures. You also mentioned a kind of different responses being developed in different countries, and maybe 3 key components here or concepts. This idea about different integration, so kind of entering other spaces, but retaining or upholding a kind of identity with its own characteristics. This also means that action, and this is I'm adding something here, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but this also means that the space that is being entered has also to change some of its characteristics. And this goes with some of the discussions that we have had around, for example, the GPDC, the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation. Some of the ideas will have to be adjusted to account for South-South cooperation. It is not only South-South cooperation that needs to change itself. And you also mentioned spaces for experimentation in different countries and measurement battles, which is this idea of different concepts and the political technical ecology around the concept. So I want to thank you very much for that. And I'm going to now, after this keynote presentation, we are going to move into the panel part of this group. I will only just share for a couple of seconds once again, my screen so that I can present the people who will be speaking with us in this event. So I hope that you can see this. And we are going to have a conversation with 4 experts and 4 practitioners with a lot of experience here in this issue of measuring South-South cooperation. We're speaking with Cristina Shalma from and I hope this is a correct translation, the Ibero-American Integrated Data System for South-South and Triangular Cooperation, which in Spanish we just say CIDIX, which is the great build of statistics and reporting by the General Ibero-American Secretariat that all countries in Latin America and the Spanish-speaking Caribbean report to. We will also speak with Enrique Oviedo and another colleague from ECLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, who will present the work that they are doing around the issue of measurement. We are also speaking with Dr. Sabyasachi Saha from the RIS, the Research and Information System for Development Countries. And we are closing with the local part of this conversation by Alexandra Diaz, our Director of South-South Cooperation at APC Colombia, who will speak about our experience in measurement and quantification. Doing this, I am stopping my presentation and giving the floor to Cristina Shalma, who will start this. Cristina, please go ahead.
Hi, many thanks. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you very much to APC Colombia for organizing this webinar. And congratulations for the high participation in that event, which is proof of its success. I really hope that we will have an interesting discussion about this important topic. I want to explain that I feel more comfortable speaking in Spanish than in English, but I will try to do my best in English, and I really hope that I can contribute to this discussion. As a representative of SEGIP, the Ibero-American General Secretariat, we can talk about 3 main topics. The first one, the context. What has been the experience from SEGIP, from the Ibero-American region? We are talking about the experience about the quantification of South-South and triangular cooperation. The second one, how has the experience been? We talk about that because the process, the way of the process, and how it has been, has had a big importance for political reasons too, as Laura said. And finally, what have we learned about this process? Related, the first one, the context. The experience from SEGIP and from the Ibero-American countries region started in 2007 when we launched our first report on South-South and triangular cooperation in Ibero-America. From then until today, we have published 13 editions. Related to that experience, one of the most important questions in our opinion is, why did we start with that exercise? And the answer is because we were responding to the demand, to the political demand of our countries. The demand appeared after the beginning of the new century, when the international community boosted the Millennium Agenda, because a lot of things changed for the developing countries, especially for the Latin American countries, which were mainly classified as middle-income countries. This fact had 2 main consequences related to our topic. One of them, the displacement of those countries as a recipient of ODI. But the second one, a new boom of the South-South cooperation. In that sense, the Latin American countries were aware that they were promoting South-South cooperation among them, but they didn't know what they were really doing, how many projects they were running, who were their main partners, which kind of capacities they were strengthening. They had a lot of questions, and they wanted to have answers. For that reason, they demanded an exercise of systematization, of quantification of their South-South cooperation. And from SEGIP, we responded to that with our annual report. This is the context, but what can we say about the process, the second topic, because it's a key point in our opinion. In order to make a report, it requires a process. It needs at least 3 main steps. On the one side, generating a conceptual and methodological framework. In other words, deciding by consensus what is South-South cooperation for our countries, and how is our South-South cooperation, which are the principles who guide our practice, and deciding too, how can we measure our South-South cooperation. On the other side, translating the concepts into data, into information. And finally, collecting and gathering the information, the data about South-South cooperation. In the case of SEGIP and the Ibero-American countries, these steps were structured around clear principles. The first one, it must be an intergovernmental and horizontal exercise, where SEGIP and countries work together in a permanent dialogue. And the second one, it must be a political and technical exercise, where you can combine technical work and political consensus. One of the best examples of that is our online registration platform, the CIDIX, ¿no? Sistema Integrado de Datos de Iberoamérica sobre Cooperación Sur-Sur, CIDIX, for everybody, which was implemented in 2015. That platform is the only one in the world for a developing region. The system allows for gathering all the South-South cooperation data in Iberoamerica. Today, we have collected the information for more than 9,000 South-South cooperation projects. But the platform also allows a cross-check of the data. In other words, the CIDIX allows 2 kinds of dialogues. One of them between the 22 Ibero-American countries, and the other one between all of them and SEGIP. As a result, we can verify the data among the partners of the same project. And the result is a data by consensus, and all the information with a great legitimacy. And the other question is, after that, which are the main learnings from the report and from this political and technical exercise? One, we are in front of a process in a continuous change, because the report and its conceptual and methodological framework is a learning process, not an objective in itself. Two, the report is a management tool for our countries, and it has strengthened our national cooperation agencies. In another sense, political empowerment and technical and institutional strengthenings. Three, it has boosted political debates, whether at national or international level. Four, it has given visibility for South-South cooperation at national and international level too, and it's important, that point. And the last one, the Ibero-American report has turned in an international reference. From SEGIP, we gave technical assistance for the first African report, and we are maintaining some talks for a possible report for the Asian and Pacific region. Well, thanks for listening, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Cristina, for those ideas, and also for putting on the table this central characteristic of the Ibero-American process, which is consensus, right? But consensus usually it's this objective that takes a lot of effort for coordination and for keeping good relations in mind. But usually technical people such as us see consensus as a very costly endeavor that sometimes goes against flexibility. And you have shown how the system for data in the Ibero-American space is a space for both things. It's a very firm consensus, but it's also a space of continuous learning and continuous experimentation. And it's no doubt that that's some of the reasons why the Ibero-American space and the effort that you lead has been a reference for other countries and other regions. And it's something that we're very grateful for you to share with us here. And thank you again. Now we move to I think we're moving to ECLAC. And I would invite our colleagues from the Economic Commission of Latin America and the Caribbean to share with us some of the experience that you have also had and the learnings you've developed about measuring and quantifying technical cooperation between southern countries. So please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Luis. I'm Luis Flores. I basically work with Enrique Oviedo on South-South Cooperation. We're both here. Let me start by congratulating the community of practice, which is really something that complements the work we're all doing. Secondly, I would like to thank Laura and Cristina, because what we have to say reinforces, and it's very much in line of in the line of what they have already mentioned. And let me give you some brief context around the work that ECLAC does on South-South Cooperation. Our main work on the topic started through the Committee on South-South Cooperation. So basically, we have two axes. We are the focal point for the South-South Cooperation. Since we're a UN agency, we're the focal point for the South-South Cooperation Office from New York that deals with South-South Cooperation globally. We act as the focal point in Latin America. But in parallel, we have had this Committee on South-South Cooperation, which is a gathering of member states of ECLAC that discuss South-South Cooperation issues in the framework of our sessions of ECLAC. This topic has become so relevant in the past years that member countries finally decided and voted to make the committee become a conference. So next year we will have a conference as a subsidiary body of ECLAC. The Conference on South-South Cooperation will hold its first meeting during the first semester of 2023. And that sort of shows what has already been said in terms of the interest that countries, particularly in our region, have around South-South Cooperation and developing means to measure and understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. Having said that, I would go back to what was already mentioned in terms of this long ongoing discussion around how to measure and why to measure, and reinforce the fact that the main aspect here is a political aspect. Because when we go to the national dimension, we can see that there are very, very interesting and solid examples of national measure. We have Mexico, Brazil, Chile, even Colombia that have methodologies, that have indicators. So there is no problem at the national level. But when it comes to the regional level, and this is kind of a paradox, because since everything seems to be working at the national level, why is it then that it doesn't work at the regional level? And this is when politics comes in. And it's precisely because of the politics underlying there that we need to address the process in the ways that Cristina and Laura have already mentioned. There needs to be a process of political agreement where countries need to face together and decide why to measure, what to measure, and finally how to measure. Sorry about that. That framework is only set by a bigger discussion on politics. And under that discussion, we see two lines of what countries have been doing in terms of this sort of following the main trend, which is the monetary measurement. But on the other side, this new approaches that have to do with giving relevance to all those aspects that are non-monetary and that do constitute certainly South-South cooperation. Having said that and reinforcing what has already been said, I would like to mention just a few cases where ECLAC has been working, clarifying that since we are acting on the political will of countries, our work has not been so systematic as the work of Sahib, and we really appreciate the reports of Sahib. They have been very helpful in our work with governments in terms of the methodology and the discussion that has been ongoing and developed. In 2014, we had a national study with Peru, and that showed 4 dimensions that are very relevant, that showed to be very relevant. One, it's fundamental to have interaction between the cooperation actors within the country and also with the interacting countries. It's very relevant to consider the different stages and aspects of the implementation of the project and its products. It's very relevant also to have a comprehensive estimation of committed and mobilized resources. And we need to have a framework of prospects so that we can replicate it. That experience in Peru gave us a lot of elements to consider regional measurements and indicators. In 2015, under the framework of the conference of the Regional Conference of Statistics of the Americas, which is also subsidiary body of ECLAC, we stepped further into developing a glossary of terms of South-South cooperation, some elements around the monetary quantification of cooperation, and finally, the basics that countries should have in order to consider reviewing their South-South cooperation. Between 2000 and 2017, countries from South-South Committee asked us to develop a methodological proposal, which we did in order to address how they would be measuring and comparing among peers their cooperation. And finally, in between 2019 and 2020, we will share the link. We came up with a study on the evaluation of South-South cooperation in 6 selected countries in Latin America and the Caribbean: Barbados, Colombia, Cuba, Jamaica, Paraguay, and Uruguay. And let me briefly finalize by congratulating our keynote speaker and Cristina, and mentioning that we're very, very pleased that we're all in line in the thoughts around South-South cooperation. Some of the lessons we've learned is that it's very, as Cristina was saying, the process is fundamental. It needs to be taken step by step. We need to integrate all cooperation agencies and statistical institutes. It's very relevant to consider the conceptual and theoretical aspects, but that has to do with politics. We need to acknowledge that fact overall. And finally, we offer the space that our upcoming conference will create in terms of a political forum for debate and discussion. So we're very pleased that we are connecting with you, because that will certainly reinforce the discussions we will be holding next year. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Luis Flores, for that presentation, also for highlighting or underscoring the importance of being of progressive or continual efforts for building consensus and trying to navigate this political landscape, and also generating evidence that then informs also politics and decision making around the space. So it's a very common theme that you find around in these kinds of discussions: the importance of being politically minded, but also based in data and based in proving concepts and proving the viability of these kinds of efforts. Sometimes resistance is not the result of ill ideas. For example, it's just a lack of proving, a lack of evidence of the viability of something. And once you prove it, then it opens up a lot of space for work. So we're very happy for that. I also took note of a couple of an upcoming event and a couple of documents that you would like to share with the group. So gladly we will receive it, or you can put it in the chat, and we will distribute it with the materials of this conference. Thank you again. And now we move about 13 or 14 hours or time zones to the future. to Delhi, and to Dr. Sabyasachi Saha from the Research and Information System for Development Countries, who will speak about us, about the learnings and the challenges about implementing Development Compact and other approaches for measuring cooperation. So please, Dr. Saha, go ahead.
Thank you, Luis, and thank you, APC Colombia, for the kind invite to join colleagues here today on a very important subject. Of course, in the last 2 years, as we were faced with the pandemic, we have been meeting, but the discussion centered more around the crisis in multilateralism and what can be done to respond to some of the pressing challenges of our times, and that continues. But this is quite refreshing, engaging once again on some of the more technical issues around how we really, have measured response to the kind of problems that we see currently, and the fact that we have been, the context has been sent first by Laura and our colleagues Christina and Dr. Enrico about the processes that lead to the kind of consensus, as we just heard, building around measurement and also the template per se. So these processes are also, it's embedded in the politics, of course, but also the history. So the historical processes also matter in the context. When we are talking about indicators and measurement of South-South cooperation, we are familiar about the debates. I request everyone to kindly put their mic on mute, or the host can put their mic on. Yeah, sure. So if you look at how as we mentioned in the beginning, that we are midway into the Agenda 2030, and there is a lot of responsibility on countries to see how their alternate pathways would look like, because we are not talking about business as usual anymore. With the current setbacks that we see. So in doing that, you look at how we began, first of all, with the measurement in terms of the SDG agenda, the global indicator framework, and the time that we took on settling on the indicators, and the huge list of tier 3 indicators that we had in the beginning, and now the decision to do away with tier 3 indicators and remain confined to the first 2 sets of indicators. But that doesn't take away the challenge from us. If you look at SDG 17, which talks about the kind of cooperation that we are into and that concerns all of us, be it South-South or triangular or multilateralism, tracking multilateralism per se, SDG 17 is by, on papers, you have the most indicators satisfying the targets that have been outlined as part of the SDG 17. But every one of us knows that those are low ambition indicators when we're talking about creation of global public goods and effective multilateralism. So having said that, since I have been kind of asked to speak a little bit about our experience on Development Compact and how the framework really looks like, because it is with the theory and practice that we that leads us to having the more generic approach towards indicators, but as we have always been mentioning, that the process really begins from the north-south divide of the earlier years. So what didn't work and what should work is the main concern, and that's where the southern countries have their unique approaches, where they feel that certain things, the way they do, actually work without causing the larger harm that becomes a byproduct of the usual template of north-south engagement. So having said that, how do we understand the principles that kind of guide the process? So what kind of solidarity, and these principles also have a historical context, how it has evolved, what kind of principles were found necessary, the kind of principles that were found sufficient, and the intermingling of the necessary conditions and the sufficient conditions, and the way we have moved into the 21st century crisis at this point. So if we look at the principles on solidarity, the principles on national ownership, the questions on interdependence, the questions on equality, of course, we know the ideas around non-conditionality and also, to be very specific, non-interference, and the question of mutual benefit. The other most important thing, which takes care of many of the concerns around the other principles that we have talked about, is the demand-driven nature of the partnership. If we go through that route, several other things are taken care of naturally. But there is something more profound and fundamental above all of that, and that is the respect for national sovereignty. So that space has to be preserved at any cost. Having said this, as many of us who have been following the work of RIS and how we try to capture India's development cooperation, we really think that it is not either or. It has to be a composite approach to development. And it is not the kind of contract that was built up in a North-South engagement. It is more about a compact. And even the compact, the way the Bretton Woods institution would think, is also their understanding of compact would also go in the form of give and take, the way we see it. But the compact that is really needed for South-South cooperation is much more horizontal, where the modalities actually have an interdependent role, a complementary role, and an affirmative role that leads to a positive kind of set of outcomes. So be it capacity building, grants, the kind of concessional and the urgent finance that is needed at times. We can give a lot of examples about what is happening in the neighborhood around India and what kind of support India is extending to countries in the neighborhood at this point. Again, the long-term perspectives, because you have to create capacities in your partner countries, and you do not contribute to their macroeconomic stability, because we know the kind of engagements that have contributed to the macroeconomic stabilities in several countries. So you cannot afford to create the macroeconomic instabilities in your partner countries. So how do you design your trade and technology policies that is actually mutually gainful? At the same time, it creates the right kind of capacities for a long-term sustained prosperity and a shared prosperity that we are talking about. But eventually, we have felt as development practitioners that the practice itself needs to evolve and be more informed of evidence, so that it's more effective in the sense that we reach the kind of impact that we desire. So in that process, how do we see stakeholder participation in the initiatives that are coming in? The timeliness and the kind of objectives that we have, where the capacity building is kind of met to the core, and whether we can have go beyond output, as Laura just mentioned, go beyond output and outcome to have the impact generated on the ground. And as we always say, that in a research organization, we can have two ways of looking at our own work, whether we have met the project deadlines or we have been successful in sustaining the research program that we are meant to do. So as researchers, we are always confronted with such important questions, and this is no different. And when we are talking about kind of tracking down things, when we are looking at impact, for economists like us, you need to have a time series of data, because you need to have, we all are aware of the enormous role played by fixed cost vis-a-vis marginal cost. So the fixed element of all investments, the sunk cost that goes into the realization of the right kind of impact, is of critical importance. From the Indian experience, of course, capacity building has been a key driver for our South-South cooperation initiatives. And as we have maintained that South-South cooperation is not something very new, and we have been doing it for the last 7 decades of post-independence, and even the cooperation initiative started before the independence. And right at the time of independence, delegations from several countries were in India for trainings. So what kind of training in India? We have seen the training programs in host countries. Over time, the fellowships and the scholarships have grown. And of course, the technical support that we share with partner countries in terms of experts and other things. Concessional finance and etc. has their own role to play. And as I've said, that the principles are important in here when we are looking at the demand-driven nature and whether they are bringing in the complementary modalities of capacity building, trade support, and technology. Again, on the question of technology, if you very carefully look at the template of South-South cooperation, the flavor of technological cooperation in the South is about the flexibilities of knowledge cooperation that it allows, the demand-driven nature of knowledge cooperation that it allows, the way we think of co-creation of physical assets in the science, technology, innovation space, the way we think of knowledge that really applies. Today, we are talking about SDGs. So how it connects to agriculture per se, the sectoral, enhancing the sectoral capacities, the nature of flexibilities that South-South cooperation has allowed in the domain of technology is amazing. And this is the time in a post-pandemic world where we are looking at science and technology innovation as an accelerator for the SDGs. This is the time we look at those modalities in detail, and that should become the bedrock and the foundation of how we assess our own initiatives on South-South cooperation. So I can continue on some of the more dense modalities and their interplay as it works out. We have had excellent results when we look at India, Mozambique, solar energy production, solar panel production cooperation, where beyond the grant, beyond the lines of credit, the capacity that was created, the technology that was transferred, and the timeliness with which the projects were made, the kind of employment creation that was done, the subsequent years, how we kind of created more capacities through trainings. So these are some of the examples. We saw similar examples in Ethiopia, where the sugar production, which has been historically supported by India in terms of sharing the germplasm, but in more recent years, the entire value chain generation around sugarcane production, India could look at it from the value chain perspective. So that is the kind of impact that you generate. So there are several examples on how development cooperation, development compact works by the interoperability of the various modalities without disturbing the macroeconomic stability in partner countries, keeping the demand-driven nature intact, and respecting sovereignty and the space for national policies in partner countries is some of the key lessons that we derive from India's South-South cooperation experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Saha, for that very interesting and thought-provoking intervention. We are discussing around here in the internal WhatsApp group a lot of questions and ideas that we have, and I'm sure a lot of the audience is also brimming with questions to pose. So I invite them to hold a couple of minutes, and after we open the mics for the Q&A session. But just to reiterate a couple of ideas you also went through the importance of being politically minded in the way that we approach this, but also keeping in mind, or keeping in the horizon, this idea of doing composite work. It's not an either-or approach. It's not a mutually exclusive ideas, for example, ODA or different cooperation approaches, but doing maybe a joint effort into looking forward for long-term perspectives and incentivizes, or you also spoke about institutional incentives for promoting long-term growth and long-term, for example, economic development, but also macroeconomic stability. You spoke about that, and also very keeping in mind the principles and being very respectful of the core principles of South-South cooperation and how you can enhance them doing development work that goes through the different dimensions of the development complex. So also financial resources, technical and capacity strengthening exercises, and also long-term perspective. So it's a very thought-provoking idea, and I thank you very much for that. And we are closing the panel with a local experience here in Colombia. So next up is Alexandra Diaz, Director of South-South Cooperation for APC Colombia. Alexandra, the floor is yours, and I will start the presentation.
Thanks a lot, Luis, and thank you to all the panelists that have accepted this invitation. My name is Alexandra Diaz. I'm Director of South-South Cooperation since January this year, so I'm relatively new to all these scenarios, but I am very, very pleased to see all these exchanges of knowledge and to see that the questions that I have that have come to my mind in this past months are common to other people around the world. So that is very relieving. And I hope to deliver today a speech that my team has made technically, that I agree with them, and I am going to add some ideas to this discussion, taking into consideration that in past lives I have been a consultant. I have made impact evaluations, result evaluations, process evaluations of public policies of Colombia, of Mexico, of at the EU. So to me, these reflections and this analysis on measurement of South-South cooperation are very interesting, although to me they're not very different from many other public policies that I have seen in other scenarios. But I'm going to go deeply later on this sentence. Let me start by providing some context from our perspective in Latin America and Colombia. We have a robust mechanism for reporting South-South cooperation to the Ibero-American General Secretariat, which has been producing reports since 12 years ago, as a panelist mentioned before. Countries report a number of projects conducted, participating partners, their roles, as well as the project title and general area of activity, education, health, infrastructure, with some information of the total budget. Yet this focus of reporting projects, partners, and topics does not reflect yet the quality of the impacts that South-South cooperation projects commonly have on the professional networks, the institutional capacities and the public policies of the participating countries, and building consensus around these qualitative aspects has not been possible yet. Despite this lack of consensus at a regional level, APC Colombia, as a public institution, is committed to improving the efficiency of its spending, following the principle that you can't manage what you can measure. Therefore, for us, data is key to improving the work of our teams and the results of our cooperation. And this drive to improving the quality of our work through measurement has only increased in relevance for us in recent years, as we have become a middle-income country and have settled into a dual role of being both recipients and providers of South-South cooperation. APC Colombia was stimulated by conversations within the Ibero-American space regarding measurement and quantification, especially around the creation of the CDICs in 2015. We understood that the statistics that were reported to the CDICs were very important to have a sense of the dimension of the work that our countries were doing and to identify opportunities that were only possible to see once you compare data across countries. Yet, we also understood that there was a qualitative side and component to the South-South cooperation that wasn't captured in the CDICs data, and that we wanted to measure and manage as well. We knew that some countries were developing local ways of measuring South-South cooperation at a finer way, at a finer level, and we reviewed the efforts being developed by Brazil, Chile, and Mexico at that time, which were carefully documented by PIFCs, and we started developing a South-South cooperation toolkit in 2016, which was finalized in 2017. The main components of this toolkit that is called model for measuring and quantifying added value, and a booklet of standardized guidelines to organize and execute South-South cooperation activities. The toolkit, as I mentioned, was finalized in 2017 and started implementations since 2018. And this model has 5 qualitative dimensions. The first one is knowledge generation, which means the documents and research that helps broaden the scope of knowledge and experts, institutions, and communities. The networks created. The third one is the visibility. The fourth is the differential approach, which has been mentioned by some of the panelists today, which visualizes how a project aims to deliver and close gaps for vulnerable population. And the fifth pillar is the alignment with the SDGs. Regarding the guidelines for conducting South-South activities, the toolkit compiled 11 key formats for the organization of knowledge exchanges. It has a project formulation format, which develops a logical framework measuring the usual dimensions of cooperation, such as partners, roles, topics, SDGs, budgets, activities, and it also has a collection of guidelines and checklists for activities throughout the entire project cycle, from logistical documents before a meeting to a form to a document to document lessons learned and the closure of a project. Implementing the toolkit has been complex since it represents a new way of approaching how our projects work. However, over time, our partners, both at a national and international level, have appreciated the insights provided by these dimensions of analysis, and we have even seen parts of it replicated by other countries in their own instruments. Although this period from 2020 to 2022 has been exceptional and a lot of activities have had to be postponed or redesigned, we mainstreamed the toolkit in 2019 and learned a lot during the process. Here, I would like to share with you some of the few lessons that we have learned. The first one is the guidelines and checklists of organizing South-South cooperation activities have been a tremendous help for standardizing procedures and mitigating staff turnover at the agency. The second one is, however, the project format has proven difficult to manage. This is a hard-earned lesson. The original format was a complex Excel file that had some macros and formulas pre-entered and that automatically projected budgets and schedules based on the information delivered. This was designed to make life easier during the project formulation phase, yet, as the saying goes, no plan survives its first contact with reality. And it often organizations created new rows or merged cells within the format, and the formulas were broken in the process. This might seem a little bit trivial, but we would have to come back. We would have to come back like a technician to repair the macros and the formulas, which caused a lot of headaches to our teams. The third lesson learned regarding the 5 dimensions of added value model. Thinking about the 5 dimensions of the model and the connection of the SDGs simultaneously with the dynamics of the project and managing the partnership means that completing the project format often requires a facilitator, which is a very high organizational cost, as each of our staff members manages dozens of projects. As a concluding reflection, I think that there's a big opportunity for replicating these methodologies in South-South cooperation context. In the case of Colombia, our National Department of Planning has as well robust methodologies for conducting different kinds of evaluations, and this is where personally I am very interested in going deeper in this analysis and this exchange of analysis, because although I am aware of all the advances that we have at the moment at APC Colombia, when I stepped in and as I have been learning from the input that we have, I still, as an economist, I still see a little bit of a gap between what we have at the moment and some things that I would like to see in the future. I would like to see some self-corporation making operation analysis, evaluations. I would like to see institutional evaluations. I would like to see results evaluations. I would like to see impact evaluations. And when I go to the data, I still don't see baselines. I don't see the data that can give me the tools in order to make to see and to foresee a possibility of making, for example, an impact evaluation. And this is something that these methodologies already exist. And it's just a way of connecting two worlds, connecting the South-South cooperation world with something that professionals in other areas are already conducting and have already developed. One of the panelists was mentioned indicators such as employment creation, technology that has been shared. These are indicators that are used in other social projects in policy making. So I would like to see, or I would like to think that here in this communities practice, we can also analyze this type of analysis and to see how can we fill in the gap in order in the future to be able to provide these kinds of evaluations that already exist. Thank you very much, and I give the word to Luis again.
Thank you, Alexandra, for that very informative perspective that you just put about the work of APC Colombia, the debates and the conversations, sometimes comfortable, sometimes not so comfortable, that we have inside the agency about the quality of our data, the way that we can approach and maybe go forward and advance in the kind of measurements that we make and the kind of reporting that we can do with the quality of the data that we have, right? I think it's important and it was very valuable for us to put this very national, very perspective, open up a bit of and show our bruises that we have developed about our work in APC Colombia, taking advantage of this important space. So I think this puts us at the end of the panel discussion. I know there's a lot of information being dumped here, but there's a lot of interest also. I see a lot of several comments in the chat, and I'm sure that other partners and other participants have their own questions. So I will give the floor right now to, and now that we enter the Q&A session, I will request the help of a couple of our colleagues, Daniel Rodriguez and Miriam Escañón from APC Colombia, who are also very much in track and working around us so that they can help me moderate this session. So I see a couple of questions in the chat. However, I also invite people to raise their hands if they want to pose a question to any of the panelists or promote or comment on the question around methodologies that we sent as a kind of a homework or an activity to think about. So please be raising your hands, those who want to speak. I will read a couple of questions here, and afterwards I will give the floor to Daniel and Miriam to help me here. So I'm going to Falguni, and Falguni also participated in the meeting in December, and he also did presented some very interesting questions around here. So as a teacher, you kind of start identifying the people who give you more work. So Falguni is certainly on the top of the mind here in the participation. So I'm going to focus on the second question by Falguni, and I believe this is more for Dr. Saha, but I'm sure that also other participants can come forward on this. So he asks, do developing countries, both provider and recipients, have the capacity to maintain statistics on private flows? And how do you extract from foreign direct investment, from FDI numbers? How do you extract the public good or the developmental portion of spending from its profit-oriented operations? I mentioned Dr. Saha, but I'm pretty sure that ECLAC could have some inputs also here, and other statistical organizations as taking this is a kind of dissection of macroeconomic statistics that usually you have to do to make sure that not everything is development oriented, but there are some technical activities here. So I will open the floor in case of any of you want to come in and answer the question from Falguni. There is silence. Uncomfortable silence is healthy.
I think Artemi is raising the hand.
Yes, if I may, it's one additional question. It would be difficult to answer Falguni's question. I have some experience on this, but I rather struggled on measuring the sort of the contribution of the private flows. But I wanted to bring one additional perspective of what Laura referred to as internal pressures, and ask about the role of the civil society in sort of South-South cooperation, because as far as I understand, most of the processes that we have considered today, Sahib and the colleagues from ECLAC, are essentially intergovernmental processes. Now, Luis, of course, mentioned that it's hard even in the intergovernmental setting to get the consensus, but it's even harder when there is civil society sort of around the table. In the North, and in relation to a number of the Northern initiatives, you know, IATI, for example, and others, civil society played a crucial role in terms of defining the why, what, and how, and even sometimes sort of leading on the shadow evaluations of impact. And of course, I worked, for example, with one civil society group in Bangladesh to define a little bit the needs. But what I see is that we still have very ad hoc approach to the inclusion of the civil society. Some of the very impressive initiatives that we saw in 2019 in Buenos Aires that were showcased by the civil society of the region, I couldn't find them anymore right now when I try to do a small search. So just wanted to ask about your experience so far of integrating the civil society perspectives. Thank you.
Maybe Cristina could have some perspective about discussions on Sahib.
Well, it's difficult for me because, as I said, from Sejip, we have some political decisions, no? And in that sense, for example, we decided that our practice, our South-South cooperation, is technical cooperation. It's not financial, and it's intergovernmental cooperation. No, it's only among governments. No, for that reason, I can respond to the private flows or no and other things. No, but I was thinking that related to that important questions. For example, some people ask us about our unit of measure. No? We measure our South-South cooperation by projects. No, our unit of measure is the projects, the number of projects. No, and some people ask to us why we don't use a cost, for example, no? A cost or value. No, it's a monetary measure. No, in that case, no. And there are a political reason. It's not a technical question. It's not only about our capacity to maintain the statistics, no, or to gather the information. It is because for the nature, or because of the nature of our South-South cooperation, the cost of our South-South cooperation is low. No? And when you compare our cost to the ODI, for example, no? You seem a little thing, no? And for that reason, when you discuss in a political sense, you became weak, no? You lose in that discussion, no? Because ODI is bigger, no? Than South-South cooperation, no? And there are a lot of questions about the unit of measure that are important, and it's related to why we are not we are not measuring, for example, by flows or by financial units.
Thank you very much, Cristina, and both Artemi also for the question in the debate. Alexandra, please go ahead.
No, regarding that, I understand. I understand the risk of implementing, for example, cost for value exercises. Nonetheless, if we reach the point of measuring the impact at the end in these international discussions, you're not going to say this is the value, this was the cost. What we're going to be discussing is we reached the technical capacity of thousands of people, which ODA maybe cannot fulfill. So if we make an improved, let's say, a measuring exercise, we will vanish a little bit the side of the investment, let's say, and we will be moving forward on the impacts. That's something that, and in the impact arena, I think that we wouldn't be weak. We would be actually even stronger, maybe, that some of these traditional projects that maybe they don't reach the result that they wanted.
Excellent. And I see also Enrique and Luis from ECLAC raising their hand. Please go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to thank Artemi for the question because it kind of puzzled everyone. And this is perhaps mainly because we've addressed South-South cooperation as a very technical issue that happens among countries and countries' authorities. And so concerning, we do have measurements of private investment, but the question here is, can private flows be seen as cooperation? And if so, which is the case and how? And that's the very political criteria, and it's a very muddy zone in which we rather not step into. But in effect, if we want to measure the impact, private flows do have an impact, and not a marginal impact, but instead a very relevant impact. So this is an arena in which we should be stepping on and considering, even though it's difficult, we need to consider it because it does have a relevance that we have not acknowledged yet. And secondly, with civil society, it's kind of the same puzzle, no? In terms of, from our experience, this is a shut conversation behind closed doors. So we're taking for granted that it's so technical that no organization in the regional or national realm will have something to say. But it's also a subject conversation. It's a subject conversation around employment, around climate change, around many subject areas in which cooperation happens. So therefore, all these themes that are relevant themes for civil society need to be taken into account. So the question is, how do we bring in civil society, and which civil society? And that needs also an effort, because we need to do a mapping. And of course, as you mentioned, Artemi, there are organizations that are from other perspective, or perhaps even through the perspective of South-South cooperation, working already in this aspect. We through the regional forum on SDGs that we organize on a yearly basis, we gather a network of cooperation agencies that started working around 2030 agenda. And one of the pillars of this network had to do with one of the fundamental pillars of the forum, which was bringing in, as the whole 2030 agenda states, civil society is relevant and all stakeholders need to be brought into the conversation. So we opened the space, but that's as far as we went. We didn't reach out, and we've been frozen at that stage because it's stepping into a landscape or an ecosystem that we don't know, that it's complex, and we're just standing there acknowledging that the relevance of the two topics that you brought, but we haven't stepped in yet. And thanks for bringing it over.
Thanks, Luis and Enrique, for these ideas. I don't know if Daniel, you'd like to see some of the questions in the chat.
Yes, Luis, thank you. Here is another question. Amanda says, first, she says that it's a great discussion, and then she says, how do we begin to assess the demand-driven nature or horizontality of South-South cooperation? After Amanda's question, there is also a comment from, I think that is from our colleagues of ABC Brazil, but I think that we can answer at the panel the question of Amanda. Any one of our panelists will be brief to respond this answer. Dr. Saha, please go ahead.
I have been, kind of listening to the discussions and the kind of issues that have been raised. Very pertinent issues. It takes us a little beyond the kind of methodology that we have been discussing at this point. And again, going back to the context, starting with the role of the private sector. It's not the why question, but the what question that is important. And we must realize that South-South cooperation is also an area where market failures are a problem. And the cooperation is to correct the failures that normally people won't engage in or countries not engage in, but you have to create the social benefit rather than the private benefit out of it. But you have to have the role that the positive role that the private sector partnership that comes in through it. And we have seen the implementation results, the projects that have come up, the technologies that have been shared. Similarly, case for civil society and the issue raised by Artemi, some of the experiments in India through the creation of Indian Forum for Development Cooperation, the engaging with civil society in terms of that takes us to the conviction that we have on the principles to begin with. And that's my point of going back to the principles. The strength of the principles would come in through greater engagement and greater discussions with the wider stakeholders, and as Enrique also mentioned. And the third issue about demand-driven is, of course, as Christina mentioned, that much of the South-South that is G2G, there is always a responsibility of how you conceive of a problem and how you conceive of the intervention. And here, you need to have the history of it. It doesn't start off with something that from today onwards we will have projects that are demand-driven. It doesn't happen like that. So, and that is where we need to go back into the history about the plurality of South-South cooperation, because it was need-based, it was demand-driven, and it was kind of tailored to suit the needs in partner countries. And despite the resource constraints in the developing world, the long-term engagement between partners, between countries in the region, between countries in the neighborhood, the shared concerns around the issues were very important, and that gives rise to the demand-driven nature of it, because that is the strength that South-South cooperation is based on. And as I mentioned in my very first slide when I was discussing the interplay of various principles, that somewhere I feel, to my understanding, the demand-driven nature kind of anchors several other principles. If we can adhere to this principle by and large, it takes care of several other principles that we should be concerned about. So this is part of the design. It is by design, and it is also part of the design and deliberate design, and that is how it should be. We should seek out our interventions from a very demand-driven perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Saha, and thank all participants and colleagues in the panel. This has been a very interesting discussion. Dr. Saha just mentioned then that taking or addressing shared problems and through a shared perspective is also one of a way of making sure that you're complying with the principle of demand-driven cooperation and also taking into account different kinds of constraints, both budgetary but also logistical and organizational constraints to address these kinds of problems. And also, time is a constraint, and we are coming the 90-minute mark for the event. So I want to thank all of you again for participating and for providing information and your neurons and your ideas for this interesting discussion, which will continue on other means. And I would also take the time to warn you or warn you ahead of time to please mark your calendars for June 29th, which is Wednesday. For the next conversation of the community of practice. We will be contacting some of you to maybe polish some of our ideas for that event, and hopefully we have your support and your ideas again. I will stop the recording right now.